Yes, a very good afternoon everyone. Welcome back. So today's discussion would be on the governance part of your syllabus. So I have always found that governance is something which aspirants generally tend to struggle with, and there is no clear cut understanding as to what exactly this is and what are the things that you have to study here. Today I'll give you a broad idea, a broad understanding of what are the topics, what are the basic issues that are to be covered here, and then I'll also be taking up a brief understanding of what exactly the term governance means. Let's start with a discussion on what exactly are you going to take up in governance. See, governance part of your syllabus has two aspects. There is a theoretical aspect of the syllabus which includes topics such as citizens charter, RTI, e-governance, social audit and so on, self-help groups. So this is the theoretical part of your syllabus. So you need to understand, first of all these topics are to be well covered. So you have to have a good understanding of what is RTI, when was it brought in, what are the basic provisions of the law, what are the recent amendments or the changes that have been made, how those changes are going to negatively affect or positively affect the very idea of governance. That is how you go about the syllabus, whether it is citizens charter, whether it is RTI, whether it is social audit and so on. Clear? So there is a theoretical part. This is a theoretical part which which needs to be covered, and again for that more importantly you can go through some available material whatever you have. Then there is a dynamic part of this particular topic, the more important part of it. The questions are likely to come from the more dynamic part of it, and here the focus that you should your preparation should be focused upon what is contemporary governance. So contemporary governance for you would include all the acts, all the important acts which are being taken up by the executive. That is, when we talk about the Union Council of Ministers, so the Union Council of Ministers, all the important decisions, though Union Council of Ministers are involved in number of decisions, but the more important ones that are there, whether it is in the form of a law which is to be presented by the Council of Ministers in the Parliament, or for that matter if there is any specific policy which has been implemented by the Council of Ministers, the executive, that is something that you need to focus upon. Not only this, a very simple way to look at it is also when you go through all the important acts of the legislature as well, or for that matter the judiciary. So what you need to do is you need to combine the contemporary ideas here. You need to combine the steps that have been taken by the legislature, the executive, the judiciary. What are the important ones? Not all of them, obviously that will not be something that you will be able to cover. So all the important steps that you have that they have taken, what are those steps, and an analysis of it, or you can say a critical analysis of it. What are the positives, what are the negatives, what are the things that it is going to affect, all of it is a part of your governance. And this dynamic or the contemporary part of governance is where current affairs becomes important, and you cover it through current affairs. Clear? That is basically what governance is. So there is a theoretical part, there is a contemporary part. Clear? Now coming directly to the very term governance and trying to understand it, our objective today is to try and understand the very concept, the very idea of governance. Now before we get into what exactly is meant by governance, we need to understand the meaning of the term government. And the term government that is there, it simply means a political institution which is responsible for decision making. See, this is exactly why we have a government. See, in a country like India, which has a population of more than 130 crores, it is not possible for the people of a country like India to decide everything by themselves. So we have adopted a parliamentary form of system, and in a parliamentary system we elect a legislature, and through the legislature whichever political party or whichever coalition of political parties gets the majority in the legislature, they form what is called as the government. Now, what exactly are they responsible for? The government is basically responsible for decision making. That is the reason why we have this body. Clear? So the government is a body, simply speaking, a body which is responsible for doing what? A body which is responsible for taking up decisions. That is basically the objective of this body. That is the reason why we have this body. That is the reason why this body exists. Now, when we use the term governance, governance is basically for technically speaking, it has a lot of things that you need to understand here, but that will not be something that is relevant for your general studies. So what we are going to do is, we are going to simplify this very idea, wherein we are just going to refer to governance as a process. So what is governance? Governance is a process. Government is an institution. Governance is a process. Clear? Now, if we talk about the government and the governance, what is the relationship between the two terms? The relationship between the two terms is quite easy to understand, because we know that there are the bodies that are in this process of governance, that are involved in this process of governance. One of the most important institutions involved is the government. So a body which is responsible for decision making, that is obviously a body which is very much involved in this in this process of governance. So what is the relationship between the term government and the term governance? The relationship is that government is an institution which is the most important institution in this process of governance. In this process of governance, it is the most important institution. Now you would ask me this question. This is something which would naturally come to your mind, is why are we saying that the government is the most important institution? And if it is the most important institution, which means there are some other institutions that are also involved. So if there are some other institutions which are involved, what are those institutions? Let's try and understand that. That's a very important part of our discussion. That is something that is very important. Now, when we talk about, when we are talking about this whole idea, what you need to additionally know here is that, just a moment. So, when we say the process called governance, in the process called governance, there is multiple stakeholders which are involved. Governance as a process involves multiple stakeholders. Governance as a process involves multiple stakeholders. Okay. So if there are multiple stakeholders, who are those stakeholders? The stakeholders in the process of governance can be, obviously, the first institution is obviously the government. But the government is not the only institution, because the contemporary process of governance involves some other institutions, like if we say the civil society. The civil society is very much involved in this very process, and by civil society what I mean is groups such as the non-governmental organizations are there. There are pressure groups that exist. There are pressure groups that exist, and along with that there are some other groups also. You can see, like, if we talk about self-help groups and so on and so on. So there are other institutions also which are very much involved in this process of governance. And then there are some other institutions, like today in the contemporary process there are also international institutions which are involved. So there are international institutions also which are very much involved in this process. So when we talk about contemporary governance, when I say contemporary governance, what you need to understand is that it was not always that there were multiple stakeholders. That was not the case, because if we go in the post Second World War period, when the concept of development was being conceived, so at that particular time it was understood, it was a belief, you can say, or it was a common understanding that the very idea of development, the very concept of development would be delivered by one and the only institution there would be the government. The government would be responsible for it. So the government as an institution and its other bodies like the civil services, bureaucracy, these institutions would be the one who would be able to, or they would be the ones who would deliver governance. But you can say 20-30 years after the Second World War, there was this very concept, this very as we said, common understanding, it was modified. The reason being that there were a lot of countries around the world, who started facing certain economic problems, and the economic problems that they were facing were basically because of the institution, which is the government or the bureaucratic institution. Why? Because when we talk about bureaucracy and the bureaucratic institutions, these bureaucratic institutions that are there, they tend to suffer from some very basic problems like red tapeism, which means there is frequent delay in taking decisions, delay in implementation of those decisions. They have a tendency of budget maximizing, that is, they tend to do what? They tend to maximize whatever money is being allocated to them. So there is inefficiency there, there is not adoption of proper reforms, there is no incentives to take up reforms and become more efficient. So when you can say around 20 years past, post the Second World War, there was a common understanding that now was developing, which was that this institution, that is the government, the bureaucracy that is there, it is not something which would be which would be the only institution which would be responsible for it, because it suffers from some basic problems of inefficiency or some basic problems which causes inefficiency. And that is the reason why there was a demand, or you can say there was a need to take up involvement of some other institutions, because if involvement of other institutions happen, it could do away with the deficiencies or the problems that the bureaucracy had. And that is the reason why the other institutions, meaning civil society, came into being. There was NGOs, etc., were already in existence, but in the process of governance, that is in the process wherein the government wanted these bodies to start providing and delivering public services, that is something which came up after this understanding. So all these organizations that we are later going to talk about, like NGOs, pressure groups, self-help groups, etc. These institutions are nothing but those institutions which today become the part of contemporary governance because of the deficiencies and the changes conceptualized post understanding of those deficiencies. Clear? In India, to simplify this, in India, we took up a major reform in the 1990s. In the 1990s, we all know what that reform was. That reform was the economic reforms of 1991. Now it's been more than 30 years since we have taken up those reforms. I expect a question in mains examination on these reforms because recently we have actually completed the 30 years. So either you can get it in this mains examination, either in economics you get a question on these economic reforms, or you get a question on this even related to governance. So in 1990s, the base, because of the background was the balance of payment crisis that we faced. The balance of payment crisis was the result of the economic inefficiencies that were there. So what we understood that there is a need to take up reforms, and these reforms were taken up in 1990s, wherein we started advocating for privatization, liberalization and so things. Clear? So by 1990s there was an understanding. There was now you can say 1990s and early 2000, most of the countries that were there, they understood that bureaucracy is not the institution, at least not the sole institution which could deliver development, and we need to take up certain changes. And those changes happened in the form of economic liberalization, which was taken up around the world. In India it was taken up in the 1990s, and what we did as a result of it is that now when we were talking about this process of governance, so rather than having a centralized approach where one institution was responsible for doing everything, we adopted a decentralized approach in which rather than the bureaucracy being responsible for everything, there was involvement and participation of other institutions as well. And those institutions were the civil society, international institutions, very much international institutions. They also today affect our the governance process. One of the examples of it I'll give, international institutions such as UN, and UN has come up with a goal which we all know, sustainable development goals, to be achieved by end of this decade, which is by 2030. So 2015 to 2030 is the goal of achieving sustainable, is the timeline in which we have to achieve the sustainable development goals. Now in this process, a goal which is determined by an international agency, an international institution, and is adopted by countries like India. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to modify our policies, we are trying to in fact come up with certain policies, modify those policies, so that what is ultimately going to happen, what is going to happen is that there are some goals that we achieve. So you can see there is participation of international institutions as well. So, and that's only one example. There are multiple examples that you are going to find in this regard. You will see examples, you can see examples of, you can very much see examples of, the Human Rights Commission, the climate change organizations that are there, and how they are trying to redefine the involvement of these institutions in the governance of a particular country. Clear? So today what we see is that the government is not the only institution, and there are other stakeholders including civil society, international institutions that are there, or for that matter even the private sector. All these institutions today very much participate in how this process of governance is taken up. Clear? Now when we talk about the process of governance, another thing that will come to your mind would be Okay, so another thing what will come to your mind would be that, okay, if we are talking about this very process of governance, what are the activities that are included in this very process of governance? What are the activities that are included in this very process of governance? What does that actually mean? So in this concept, though most of you would be knowing about this, but I would still like to discuss one of the important ideas, which would be the idea of welfareism. The idea of welfareism, or what we call as the welfare state. Now this concept of welfare state, what exactly does it mean? See, this concept of welfare state that is there, it is exactly the opposite of what was previously in existence, which we called as the police state. What we called as the police state. Now, understand this. What is a police state? A police state is a state which has limited responsibilities. Like, if we talk about the responsibilities that a police state has, it would include responsibilities such as maintenance of law and order, maintenance of law and order, and along with that, along with maintenance of law and order, the responsibility of doing what? The responsibility of collecting revenue. Collecting revenue. So this is the only responsibility that a police state would have. The only responsibility that a police state would have. Clear? Like if we compare this very idea to the British period, that is when the Britishers were ruling India. So if you look at the policies etc. of the Britishers, you would find that when Britishers were ruling India, they were nothing but a police state. So they were primarily responsible for maintenance of law and order and collection of revenue. Maintenance of law and order was important because if they could maintain law and order, it would contribute to their economic exploitation of India. That was their objective, and that is what they did. That was their objective, and that is what they did. Clear? So you can see the police state had limited responsibilities. Now, in the contrary to this, when we talk about a welfare state is a state which has responsibilities which are not limited to just collection of revenue as well as maintenance of law and order, and there is a broad set of responsibilities which are a part of it. There is a broad set of responsibilities which are a part of what welfare state does. Like if we talk about welfare state is about providing education to the students. Welfare state, the state is also responsible for health. They are also responsible for providing employment. They are also responsible for maintenance of infrastructure, and so on. Clear? So there are multiple responsibilities that a welfare state has. So we describe a welfare state as what? We describe a welfare state as a state which is present from cradle to grave, or a state which is present from womb to tomb. So a state which is present from womb to tomb, a state which is present from cradle to grave, which means each and every aspect of our life is what? It is touched by the state. So when we talk about traveling somewhere, infrastructure is what state gives us. If we talk about children studying, so the government is responsible for maintenance of not only quality education but also the educational institutions that are there. The government is also responsible for ensuring that the proper nutrition of the children are taken up. So midday meal schemes and Poshan Abhiyan and such nutrition and health related schemes are taken up. Citizen care is to be taken up. Senior citizen care is the state's responsibility, and so on. So a state which is which touches each and every aspect of our life, cradle to grave. So when we talk about a welfare state, in this process of governance, the each and every activity which is taken up within this is what is the responsibility of what we say, this is what comprises of governance, this is what the responsibility of a welfare state is. Clear? This is what a welfare state is. So what is a welfare state? A state which is present, which is there from cradle to grave, a state which is which touches each and every aspect of our life. So if we compare the welfare state to that of the police state, we understand the scope of activities of welfare state is much more. The scope of the activities of a welfare state is much more than the activities which are taken up by the police state. This scope is comparatively very less. Clear? So what are the things that we have discussed till now? We have till now discussed what is governance. We have understood how the very concept of governance has changed, because initially it was understood that the state and state-led institutions are what are the institutions which would be delivering governance, or which would be delivering services. We understood that this centralized approach does not work. We have understood that, and hence we have moved towards a more decentralized idea today with the participation of multiple institutions. Clear? So this is what the contemporary governance is. The responsibility of contemporary governance is to take up welfare. Clear? Now let's come to a very widely used term which is called as good governance. Let's try and understand exactly what this term good governance is, and a theoretical way, where does the term originate from, and how is it to be used in India. Let's try and understand that. Clear? Okay. So let's try and understand the concept of good governance. The concept of good governance. So what is this concept of good governance? What exactly does it stand for? See, the concept of good governance is not a new concept. The term good governance is relatively new. The term good governance is relatively new because the term good governance was coined by the World Bank. The World Bank coined the term good governance, and it coined the term good governance in the 1980s, late 1980s, early 1990s was the term, it was the first time when the term good governance was used. But the concept of good governance is not new. The very idea of good governance, you will find that this concept of good governance even has an ancient origin. Why am I saying that? I am saying that because if we look at the thesis Arthashastra, and I hope all of you know who is who has written this thesis Arthashastra. Arthashastra was written by Kautilya. Arthashastra was written by Kautilya. So if we look at Kautilya's ideas in Arthashastra, if you try and go through it, and if you look at what are the you can say prescriptions that Kautilya has given, you would find that what Kautilya is prescribing for is the existence of a state which is responsible for taking up welfare of its people. And the whole idea of Arthashastra, the different, books that he has written within Arthashastra, or different, it's a thesis. So in that you will find that the various chapters that are there, they are dedicated to how this can be achieved. So, you will find the concepts, in Arthashastra, like, Kautilya talking about things such as Palana, Rakshana, and other ideas which are nothing but the concept of good governance. Which is nothing but the concept of good governance. In fact, he considers that the king has the duty to take up what? He has the duty to take up Palana and Rakshana of what? Of his subjects. It is his duty. So he is talking about a state where the leader, or you can say the king, is responsible for ensuring that there is existence of a society which is a prosperous society, where the state is responsible for taking up welfare. Nothing but the concept of good governance. Similarly, even when we talk about the concept of Suraj, it's a Gandhian concept, though Gandhiji coined the term, the concept of Suraj, not exactly he coined the term, but he did very explicitly talk about it. He talked about something called as the Ram Rajya, with a reference to Ramayana, where Lord Ram is considered to be an ideal king. That is the reason why he is called as Maryada Purushottam Ram, because he was an individual who upheld the highest standards, highest standards of values, and not only just in his personal life, even when he was the king, he was a just king. So the existence of Ram Raj, a particular state where things are good, the state is taking up activities for the welfare of the people, and the state is a just state, that is nothing but the concept of good governance. That is nothing but the concept of good governance. However, in contemporary times, the terminology that the World Bank was responsible for coining the term good governance, and the World Bank coined the term good governance in the context of what? In the context of when the World Bank took up a survey in sub-Saharan Africa. So in the late 1980s, World Bank took up a survey in the sub-Saharan region of Africa, and they wanted to know that why is it that this region, that is the sub-Saharan region, is considered and is the least developed region of the world, despite the fact that there are so many institutions and there are so much aid which is being provided by different world institutions to this particular region. And what the World Bank found was that World Bank was of the opinion that this is due to lack of good governance. Due to lack of good governance. So, the World Bank was of the opinion that if we want a state which could do what? A state which could provide for, a state which could provide for good governance, or until unless there is good governance, we cannot see economic development. We cannot see economic development, because World Bank was of the opinion that good governance is a precondition for development, or you can say precondition for economic development. It was a precondition for economic it was a precondition for economic development. It was a precondition for economic development, and because of this what happened was that because of this until unless we have, no, the World Bank was of the opinion that until unless in the sub-Saharan region these certain steps are taken, until unless that those steps are taken, there cannot be economic development. Briefly speaking, what World Bank was referring to while they were, they were coining the term and using the term good governance was a set of administrative and political reforms. Administrative and political reforms. So if these administrative and political reforms are taken up, only when these reforms are taken up, then what we are going to achieve is good governance, is economic development, or we will not achieve it. To summarize, what exactly is meant by good governance, what we can simply do is we can simply try and identify. What are the what can be the features of good governance. If we identify the features of good governance, we will be able to more accurately coin the very idea that what exactly is meant by good governance. So what we need to do is we need to look at what are the features of good governance. So if we talk about the features of good governance, we can say that good governance as an idea has some basic features. And what are those features? The features would include ideas of accountability, transparency, participation, rule of law, consensus orientation, efficiency, and effectiveness. Then we have equity and equality, equity and equality. Along with that, we also have responsiveness. So if we talk about a government or an administration as well as a political structure which has these features, which means they are accountable, they are transparent, there is participation, there is existence of rule of law, there is consensus orientation, there is efficiency and effectiveness, there is equity and equality as well as responsiveness. So if these are certain features that does exist in an administrative setup, in a political setup, these are certain features that are visible there, only then that is what exactly good governance is, and that is when we can we can try and achieve economic development or overall prosperity. Now when we talk about terms such as accountability or terms such as transparency, so accountability and transparency means what? Accountability and transparency means where we are or the people who are in power, they are accountable for the decisions that they are taking. So they have to be answerable to the people. Transparency means people exactly get to know what are the basis and how these decisions are being taken. Participation means that they get an opportunity to participate in the decision making. So decision making should not be a centralized or should not be an elitist activity. Rather, people citizens are allowed to participate in the process. Similarly, when we talk about rule of law, that is, there should not be arbitrary implementation of law. Everyone is equal below the eyes of the law, and everyone should enjoy similar status in the eyes of the law. Similarly, consensus orientation means decision making should not be for only some of the individuals, rather it should be broad based, consensus based, and should be beneficial for all. Efficiency and effectiveness, it has to do with economics part of it, that is, decisions that are being taken by the government, these decisions are effective, and that means they are achieving their goals, and that their goals that are being achieved, it is being achieved economically, which means less and less expenditure, more and more results. Similarly, equity and equality, equality means everyone, equity means something which is ensuring that there is a specific care that is taken up for whom, a specific care is taken up for those who are at the bottom or at the lowest level in terms of hierarchy. That means we are talking about disadvantaged section. And responsiveness means delivering services in a manner that people want, in accordance to their needs, rather than just imposing services on them. What we need to do is we need to give services in a manner that they want us to provide services, the manner in which they want us to provide services. That is how these services are being to be delivered. Clear? So this is the basic concept of good governance. We are going to build upon these ideas in later part of our discussion. Clear? Thank you. That's it for this lecture. Thank you.